When you picture the Ottoman harem, what comes to mind? Is it a scene straight out of a painting? Maybe you imagine opulent rooms draped in silk, glittering with gold, where the air is filled with soft music and the scent of exotic perfumes. It's an image of luxury beyond belief. A world where beautiful women in dazzling outfits live lives of ease and pleasure inside a grand palace. This is the version we see in movies, the fantasy that has captured imaginations for centuries. It's a tale of romance, beauty, and indulgence. But what if I told you that this glittering facade hid a much darker, more complicated reality? Today, we're going to pull back the velvet curtain and look past the golden shimmer. We'll explore the hidden world of the Ottoman Imperial Harem, a world that, for many of its residents, was less of a paradise and more of a gilded cage. Behind the glamorous image was a reality filled with strict rules, intense competition, and a constant struggle for survival. For the countless women who lived within its walls, life was a complex web of power, fear, and control. They were given every material comfort, the finest clothes, delicious food, and the life free from physical labor. But this came at a steep price. Their freedom, their every move was watched, their every day was scheduled, and their entire existence was dictated by the rigid hierarchy of the palace. So, how did a woman end up in the harem? Most were not there by choice. Many were captured during wars, sold in slave markets, or given as political gifts from foreign lands. They were often very young, taken from their homes and families, and stripped of their names and past identities. Upon entering the palace, they began a new life, a life of rigorous training. They were taught Turkish, learned to read and write, and were instructed in music, dance, poetry, and the intricate etiquette of the court. This wasn't just about making them pleasant companions. It was about erasing their past and molding them into perfect, obedient members of the Sultan's extended household. They were, in essence, the property of the Sultan. Life inside the harem was a pyramid of power. At the very bottom were the newcomers, the ordinary concubines, or Karis. Above them were those who had caught the Sultan's eye and shared his bed, the Gis. If a woman gave birth to a child, her status soared, especially if it was a son. She would then be known as Haseki or Kadim, a favored consort. At the absolute peak of this pyramid was the most powerful woman in the entire empire, the valid Sultan, the mother of the reigning Sultan. She was the ultimate authority, managing the harem's vast finances, arranging political marriages for the princesses, and wielding immense influence over her son and, by extension, the entire government. For a young girl entering the harem, the path to power was long and treacherous, and very few ever reached the top. The competition was ruthless. Every woman vied for the Sultan's attention because his favor was the only path to a better life, to security, and to power. This created an atmosphere of intense jealousy and rivalry. Alliances were formed and broken. Whispers and secrets were traded like currency in the hallways, and plots were a constant threat. A woman who fell out of favor could find herself forgotten, cast aside to live out her days in obscurity within the old palace, a place for retired or disgraced concubines. The smile of the Sultan could elevate you to the heavens, but his indifference could cast you into a silent, lonely existence. It was a high-stakes game where the prize was influence, but the cost of losing was everything. So, while the image of the harem is one of beauty and luxury, the truth is far more complex. It was a place of deep contradictions. It was a home, but also a prison. It was a school, but its lessons were in survival. It offered a life of unimaginable wealth, but at the cost of personal freedom. The women of the harem were not just passive beauties lounging on silk cushions. They were survivors, strategists, and politicians in their own right, navigating a dangerous world with intelligence and resilience. Their stories are a powerful reminder that history is often more nuanced and fascinating than the myths we are told. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the hidden world of the Ottoman. Ever wondered what it was like inside the walls of one of history's most powerful empires? Imagine a place where a single word could build a city or start a war. A place where luxury and danger lived side by side. Welcome to the heart of the Ottoman Empire, the Sultan's Palace. For over 600 years, the Ottomans ruled a vast territory stretching across 3 continents: Europe, Asia, and Africa. Their influence shaped the course of history, and at the very center of this colossal empire was the Sultan. But the Sultan's power wasn't just exercised on the battlefield or in grand decrees. It was forged and maintained within the intricate, hidden world of the Imperial Palace. This wasn't just a home. It was the nerve center of an empire, a city within a city, bustling with thousands of people, from the highest-ranking viziers to the most humble servants. Everyone played a role in a complex game of power, ambition, and survival. Today, we're pulling back the curtain to explore the secrets of the Ottoman court, a world where silence was golden and loyalty was a matter of life and death. Let's start by picturing the scene. We're not just talking about one palace, but a series of them over the centuries, most famously Topkapi Palace in Istanbul. This was no ordinary royal residence. It was a sprawling complex of courtyards, chambers, gardens, and administrative buildings. Think of it as the White House, the Pentagon, and a royal court all rolled into one. Thousands of people lived and worked here. Ministers, generals, elite guards known as the Janissaries, scholars, artists, and a vast household staff. The palace was divided into sections. The outer court, or Birin, was the public and administrative area. Here, state business was conducted, dignitaries were received, and the grand ceremonies that showcased the Sultan's power took place. This was the face the empire showed to the world: organized, opulent, and intimidating. But the real secrets, the real power plays, happened deeper inside, in a place forbidden to most. The inner court, or Enderun. The Enderun was the Sultan's private domain. It housed the imperial treasury, sacred relics, and the famous palace school. This school was unique. It recruited promising young boys from across the empire, often through the Devshirme system, a levy on Christian subjects. These boys were converted, educated, and trained to become the empire's future leaders, governors, generals, and even grand viziers. Their loyalty was meant to be to the Sultan alone, unbound by family or regional ties. This was the ultimate system of control, creating an elite class whose entire existence was tied to the will of one man. But even deeper within the palace lay its most mythologized and misunderstood section, the harem. The word harem simply means forbidden or private. Far from the sensationalized fantasies, the imperial harem was a highly structured and powerful institution. It was the private quarters of the Sultan and his family, including his mother, the Valid Sultan, his wives, concubines, and children. But it was much more than a family home. The harem was a political battleground. At the top of the harem's hierarchy was the Valid Sultan, the Sultan's mother. She often wielded immense influence, not just within the harem but over the affairs of the entire empire. She managed the harem's vast wealth, advised her son, and formed powerful political alliances. For a period known as the Sultanate of Women, a series of influential Valid sultans and consorts effectively governed the empire, making decisions that shaped its destiny. This wasn't just palace gossip. This was high-stakes politics. Within this world, every woman was vying for influence. The ultimate prize was to bear a son who would one day become sultan. This would elevate a concubine to the status of Hasaki Sultan, the chief consort, and potentially the future Valid Sultan. The competition was fierce. Alliances were formed and broken. Whispers in corridors could lead to promotions or executions. The women of the harem were not passive residents. They were intelligent, educated, and politically savvy players in a dangerous game. They had to be, and the danger was very real. Life in the palace was a tightrope walk. A single misstep, a perceived insult, or a rumor of disloyalty could have fatal consequences. The Sultan's power was absolute. He was the shadow of God on earth. To challenge him was to challenge the divine order. This created an atmosphere of constant tension and paranoia. Everyone was watching everyone else. Servants spied on officials, officials spied on each other, and everyone reported back to a network of informants loyal to the Sultan. One of the most chilling aspects of this system was the practice of fratricide, the killing of one's brothers. When a new Sultan ascended to the throne, it was common practice for him to eliminate his brothers to prevent any rival claims to power. This was unseen as murder, but as a necessary evil to ensure the stability of the empire and prevent devastating civil wars. Imagine growing up in a palace, knowing that the brother you played with as a child could one day order your death. This brutal reality shaped the psychology of every prince, every kezet. They lived in a gilded cage, surrounded by luxury but constantly aware that their life could end the moment their father passed away. This culture of fear and silence extended to everyone. Expressing a dissenting opinion was incredibly risky. Even the Grand Vizier, the most powerful official after the Sultan, served at the Sultan's pleasure. Many Grand Viziers ended their careers not with a peaceful retirement, but with an executioner's silk cord. In this environment, silence was often the wisest strategy. It was safer to say nothing than to say the wrong thing. Truth was a luxury few could afford. The walls literally had ears. Special servants, known as the mutes, were employed in the inner sanctum. Because they could not speak, they were considered trustworthy keepers of the Sultan's most sensitive secrets. Their presence is a powerful symbol of the palace's obsession with secrecy and control. Every conversation was guarded, every letter was coded, and every action was calculated. So, how did anyone navigate this treacherous world? Through loyalty? Or at least the appearance of it. Public displays of devotion to the Sultan were constant. But true loyalty was a rare and precious commodity. More often, people formed factions and temporary alliances to protect their interests. You had to choose your allies carefully. A powerful patron could protect you, but if they fell from grace, you would fall with them. It was a constant dance of balancing ambition with caution, and trust was the most valuable and fragile currency. The Ottoman palace was a microcosm of the empire itself, a place of incredible sophistication, art, and culture, but also a place of ruthless pragmatism and brutal power. It was a world where a poet could be a spy, a gardener could be an informant, and the woman pouring your coffee could be plotting for her son to rule the world. The stunning architecture and lavish decorations masked a world of constant surveillance, silent maneuvering, and life-or-death decisions. The legacy of this system is complex. On one hand, it created a highly centralized and stable state that lasted for centuries. On the other, the intense internal politics and paranoia often led to instability, weak leadership, and decisions based on personal rivalries rather than the good of the state. As the centuries wore on, the internal power struggles of the palace became a major factor in the empire's long decline. The next time you see a picture of a grand palace, remember that its beauty often hides a more complicated story. The walls of the Ottoman palace were not just built of stone and marble. They were built of secrets, power, and fear. They witnessed the rise and fall of sultans, the triumphs of armies, and the quiet, desperate struggles for survival that defined life at the... Have you ever heard the word harem and immediately pictured a scene from a fantasy movie? You know, rooms filled with silks and jewels, where women exist only for the pleasure of a powerful ruler. Well, get ready to have your mind blown, because the reality of the historical harem is so much more complex and fascinating. Let's start with the word itself. In Arabic, haram literally means a sacred, inviolable place, or forbidder. It was a protected space, off limits to most men. Think of it less like a pleasure palace and more like the private quarters of a royal household. This was the domestic world of the empire, a realm run by and for women. But who were these women? They weren't just wives and concubines. The harem was home to the ruler's mother, his sisters, his daughters, female relatives, and all the servants and staff required to run this massive household. It was a bustling, multi-generational community of women. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so it was a big house for royal women. What's the big deal? The big deal is that the harem was a major center of political power. It was far from a gilded cage where women just sat around looking pretty. These women were at the heart of the empire's politics. The most powerful woman in the Ottoman harem, for example, was often not the sultan's favorite wife, but his mother, the valid sultan. She held immense influence, managing the harem's vast resources, advising her son on matters of state, and even acting as a regent when he was too young to rule. Her word carried incredible weight. Within this protected space, a complex social and political web was woven. Marriages were arranged to create powerful alliances with other states or influential families within the empire. These women weren't just pawns. They were diplomats and power brokers in their own right. They brought with them their own networks, their own ambitions, and their own political savvy. The harem was also a hotbed of intrigue and rivalry. Imagine a place where the mothers of potential future emperors lived together. The competition was fierce. A woman whose son ascended to the throne would see her own status skyrocket. This created intense rivalries between different factions. Alliances were constantly forming and breaking. Secrets were the currency of power, gathered by loyal servants and traded in quiet conversations. A whispered rumor in the harem could lead to the downfall of a powerful vizier or shift the entire course of the empire's future. The succession of the throne was often decided not on the battlefield, but within the walls of the harem. Furthermore, these women were often highly educated. They were trained in arts, music, literature, and even politics and administration. Many were patrons of architecture, commissioning mosques, hospitals, and fountains that still stand today. They managed huge charitable endowments, wielding significant economic power and earning the respect and loyalty of the public. They were businesswomen, politicians, and cultural influencers, all from within their designated sphere. So, the next time you hear the word harem, I want you to remember this. It wasn't just a fantasy of male power. It was a dynamic, powerful institution managed by women. It was a place of family, education, and political maneuvering. It was a space where the destinies of empires were shaped by intelligent and ambitious women who knew how to play the game of power. The real story of the harem is not one of silent, beautiful captives. It's a story of female agency, influence, and power that has been overlooked for far too long. Thanks so much for watching. Ever wondered what life was really like inside the legendary harems of the Ottoman Empire? It's a world often shrouded in fantasy and myth, but the reality was far more complex and fascinating. Let us pull back the curtain and discover the true stories of the women who lived within those gilded walls. The word haram simply means forbidden or private in Arabic. It was the secluded, private quarters of the Sultan's palace, home not just to his wives and concubines, but also to his mother, the powerful valid Sultan, his sisters, daughters, and a vast staff of female servants and eunuchs. This was a complete, self-contained society, a world run by women, for women, where men, apart from the Sultan and the eunuchs who guarded them, were strictly forbidden. Now, where did these women come from? Contrary to popular belief, they weren't just a collection of beautiful locals. The harem was a stunningly diverse and cosmopolitan place. Women arrived from all corners of the known world. There were Circassians from the Caucasus, famous for their striking beauty, Ukrainians, and Russians captured in raids, elegant ladies from noble European families, and women from as far as Africa and across Asia. Their paths to the palace were varied and often tragic. Many were captured during wartime, taken as prisoners and considered spoils of war. Others were purchased from slave markets, sometimes sold by their own impoverished families in the hope of a better life. Some were even sent as diplomatic gifts from foreign rulers, a living, breathing symbol of alliance. Regardless of how they arrived, once they passed through the harem gates, their old lives were over, and a new, uncertain future began. Upon entering the harem, a young woman, often just a girl, would begin an intensive and rigorous education. This wasn't just about looking pretty. They were trained to become ladies of the court. They learned the Turkish language, the principles of Islam, and how to read and write. They were taught music, learning to play instruments like the oud or the kazak. They studied poetry, dance, and most importantly, the intricate rules of palace etiquette and absolute obedience. They were being molded into ideal companions for the most powerful man in the empire. Life inside was a strict hierarchy. At the very bottom were the newest arrivals, the odalisks, which simply means chambermaid. Their days were filled with serving the higher-ranking women. If an odalisk was beautiful, talented, and lucky, she might catch the eye of the valid sultan or the kalfas, the senior female overseers. She could then be promoted to gedikli, a concubine in waiting, and eventually she might be chosen to spend a night with the sultan. This was the moment that could change everything. If she captivated the sultan and became one of his favorites, she would rise in rank to it, and if she gave birth to a child, especially a son, her status would soar. She would become a Kadoni Fendi, one of the sultan's official consorts, with her own apartments, servants, and a substantial income. The ultimate prize, however, was for her son to become the next sultan. If that happened, she would ascend to the pinnacle of power, becoming the valid sultan, the mother of the sultan and the most powerful woman in the entire Ottoman Empire, effectively ruling the harem and wielding immense influence over the state. But this path to power was a dream realized by only a tiny few. For the vast majority of women in the harem, life was one of quiet obscurity. They would spend their entire lives within the palace walls, serving others, perhaps forming close friendships, but never gaining the sultan's attention. After years of service, some might be granted their freedom and married off to high-ranking officials, a reward for their loyalty. Others would simply grow old within the harem, their stories and names lost to history. The harem was not just a place of romance and luxury. It was a place of ambition, rivalry, and survival. It was a complex social and political institution that played a crucial role in the governance of one of the world's greatest empires. The stories of these women, from all corners of the earth, are a powerful reminder of the hidden histories that lie just beneath the surface of what we think we know. Thanks for joining me on this journey. Have you ever wondered what it was really like for the women who entered a historical harem? It's often portrayed as a world of luxury and romance, but for so many, the reality was a stark and brutal contrast. The truth is, a vast number of these women and girls didn't choose this life. They weren't seeking power or riches. Instead, their journey into the harem began with violence and loss. Imagine a village raid or a battle. In the chaos, families were torn apart, and many young women were captured as spoils of war. They were seen not as people, but as prizes. Others were sold into this life by human traffickers, their futures traded for coin. Think about that for a moment. One day, you're with your family, living your life, and the next you're being herded away by strangers. Everything you've ever known ripped away from you forever. This devastating separation was just the beginning of a profound and systematic erasure of their identities. Upon arrival at the palace, the first thing stripped from them was their name. The name their parents gave them, the one that tied them to their heritage and their past, was replaced with a new one. This wasn't just a simple change. It was a deliberate act to sever their connection to their former lives. They were being remade, molded into something new for the convenience of their captors. Along with a new name came new clothes, new customs, and a new language they were forced to learn. Every link to their home, their culture, and their family was methodically cut. They were being trained to forget who they were, to erase the memories of their loved ones and the life they once had. The emotional toll of this process was immense. Imagine the overwhelming fear and confusion. You're in a completely foreign environment, surrounded by strangers, unable to understand what's being said. You have no one to trust, no one to confide in. The loneliness must have been crushing. These were often very young girls, some just children, suddenly thrust into a highly competitive and often dangerous world. They had to navigate complex hierarchies and unspoken rules just to survive. The initial period was a blur of fear, disorientation, and profound grief for the life and the family they would likely never see again. It's a far cry from the glamorous image we often see in movies and books. It was a life that began with trauma. Life inside the harem walls was a structured, disciplined, and often isolating existence. The women underwent rigorous training. They were taught music, dance, poetry, and the art of conversation, all to make them more appealing companions. But this education wasn't for their own enrichment. It was to serve the desires and expectations of one person, the ruler. Their days were meticulously scheduled, from waking to sleeping, with little to no personal freedom. Their movements were restricted, their interactions monitored. They lived in a gilded cage, surrounded by beauty, but devoid of liberty. Friendships could be complicated, often shadowed by rivalry, as everyone was competing for favor and a slightly better position in this rigid hierarchy. It was a life of constant performance, where a single misstep could have serious consequences. It's so important that we remember these stories, not as romantic fantasies, but as the real, often painful, human experiences they were. These were not just nameless figures in a historical drama. They were daughters, sisters, and individuals with their own dreams and histories, which were tragically cut short. By understanding the difficult reality of how many entered the harem, we gain a more accurate and compassionate view of the past. It reminds us of the resilience of the human spirit in the face of... Imagine a world shimmering with silk, scented with exotic perfumes, and filled with the gentle melody of lutes and flutes. This was the harem, a place that, from the outside, looked like a paradise on earth. We picture sprawling gardens with bubbling fountains, lavish bathhouses filled with steam and laughter, and women adorned in jewels, enjoying the finest foods imaginable. It was a vision of ultimate luxury, a life free from the toils of the outside world. But what if I told you that this gilded cage, for all its beauty, was still a cage? Let us peel back the layers of opulence and discover the hidden reality of daily life inside the harem. Titruti's life within those palace walls was governed by an ironclad set of rules, a rigid hierarchy that dictated every single moment of a woman's day. From the moment she woke to the moment she slept, her life wasn't truly her own. Every movement was watched, every conversation was overheard, and every word could be a potential weapon, either for her or against her. The harem was a complex social web, and navigating it was a matter of survival. The structure was incredibly strict. At the top was the Valid Sultan, the mother of the reigning sultan. Her power was immense, second only to the sultan himself. She managed the harem, its finances, and the education of its residents. Below her were the sultan's favorites, the mothers of his children, and then a descending ladder of concubines, servants, and trainees. A typical day would start early, long before sunrise. The women would rise for morning prayers, followed by a communal breakfast. But this wasn't a leisurely meal. It was a time to see and be seen, to gauge the mood of the powerful figures in the room. After breakfast, the day was filled with structured activities. Young girls and new arrivals would spend hours in training. They learned to read and write, to play musical instruments, to dance, and to master the art of conversation and etiquette. This education wasn't just for personal enrichment. It was to make them more desirable companions for the sultan. They were being molded into the ideal of feminine perfection, but it was an ideal defined entirely by someone else. Even leisure time was controlled. Strolls in the garden, visits to the bathhouse, these were all supervised events. There was very little true privacy. The walls had ears, and the eyes of rivals were everywhere. Competition was the invisible current that ran through the entire harem. Every woman, regardless of her rank, was vying for the same prize. The sultan's attention, catching his eye, could mean a meteoric rise in status. It could mean better chambers, finer clothes, more influence, and most importantly, security. If a woman bore the sultan a son, her position became solidified. She would ascend to a place of great honor and power. But this constant contest created an atmosphere of suspicion and jealousy. Friendships were often strategic alliances. The silly broken, a misspoken word, a perceived slight, or a rumor could lead to severe punishment, or a fall from grace. Women formed factions, rallying around powerful figures, plotting to elevate their own and undermine their rivals. This wasn't just petty squabbling. It was a high-stakes game where the winners enjoyed immense privilege, and the losers could be forgotten or cast aside. So, all that luxury, the fine silks, the sparkling jewels, the gourmet meals, served a dual purpose. On one hand, it was a display of the empire's vast wealth and power, but on the other, it was a tool of control. By providing for every material need, the system made the women dependent. They had no financial independence, no connection to the world outside the palace walls. Their entire existence was tied to their place within the harem. The luxury kept them comfortable but also confined, dazzling them into compliance. The beautiful gardens were their entire world. The exquisite music was the soundtrack to their captivity. The rich food was a small comfort in a life where true freedom was the one thing they could never have. It was a world of profound contradictions, where beauty masked a life of constant pressure, and opulence was just another form of control. When we look back at the harem, it's important to see beyond the fantasy. We must recognize the intelligence, resilience, and agency of the women who lived there. They were not just passive dolls in a gilded cage. They were politicians, strategists, mothers, and artists who navigated an incredibly complex and restrictive system. They found ways to exert influence, to build networks, and to secure a future for themselves and their children within the confines of their world. Their story is not just one of luxury and confinement, but one of human ingenuity and the enduring will to survive and thrive, even in the most challenging of circumstances. Thanks for watching. And if you found this glimpse into the past interesting, don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that explore the hidden corners of history. Imagine a world where every single move you make is watched, judged, and controlled. A world where breaking the rules, even the smallest ones, doesn't just get you a slap on the wrist. It could mean being punished in ways you can't even imagine. It could mean being completely cut off from everyone you know and love, thrown into a state of total isolation. Or worse, it could mean being removed entirely, as if you never existed in the first place. Think about that for a second. The constant fear, the suffocating pressure to conform, to be perfect in the eyes of an unseen authority. In this kind of world, even something as natural and human as friendship becomes a massive risk. Who can you trust when anyone could be an informant? A simple conversation, a shared laugh, a moment of genuine connection, all of it could be misinterpreted, twisted, and used against you. Every new person you meet is a potential threat. Every secret you share is a liability. You'd have to build walls around yourself so high and thick that nothing could get in. But what kind of life is that? Living inside a fortress of your own making, completely alone. You'd be forced to question every relationship. Is this person my friend because they genuinely like me? Or are they trying to get close to find my weaknesses, to report my every slip-up? The paranoia would be relentless. It would eat away at the very foundations of human society, which are built on trust and cooperation. Friendships, instead of being a source of strength and comfort, would become a dangerous gamble, a tightrope walk over a pit of betrayal. And what about freedom? In a system like this, freedom is a forgotten word, a concept from a distant past that sounds like a fairy tale. Freedom of speech, you say what you're told to say, or you stay silent. Freedom of thought, a dangerous luxury. You train your mind to think only approved thoughts, because even a flicker of dissent in your eyes could be your downfall. Freedom of choice. An illusion. Your path is chosen for you, your job, your partner, your purpose. You are a cog in a massive, unfeeling machine. Every day would be a performance. You wake up, you put on your mask, and you play your part. The part of the obedient, happy, productive citizen. You smile when you're supposed to smile. You clap when you're supposed to clap. And you never, ever question the script. Because questioning is the first step towards breaking the rules. And you know what happens to those who break the rules. The worst part is how this system perpetuates itself. People born into it would know nothing else. They might even defend it, believing it's the only way to maintain order and peace. They would police each other, reporting on their own neighbors, friends, and even family members, all in the name of loyalty to the system. The very fabric of human connection would be rewoven into a net designed to trap, not to support. This isn't just a thought experiment. It's a warning. It's a reminder of the incredible value of the freedoms we often take for granted. The freedom to speak our minds, to choose our friends, to make our own mistakes and learn from them. The ability to trust, to love, to connect with others without fear. These are not small things. They are the very essence of what makes us human. When we see systems of control and fear creeping into our own world, we have to recognize them for what they are and remember the stark, colorless world that exists without these fundamental liberties. Thanks for watching. If this made you think, consider subscribing for more content that explores the big questions.